Sarah and John Winter, a couple eagerly expecting their first child, were busy setting up the nursery, excitedly leaving it gender-neutral since they didn't yet know if they were having a boy or girl. Sarah, a math professor at the local university, was feeling the joy of the moment, while John, an architect, was balancing work at his firm. His ex, Alyssa Hayes, who worked alongside him, still harbored feelings for him. One evening, as Sarah was at home playing piano, she suddenly felt a sharp pain. She tried calling John, but he was tied up with clients. When he finally noticed her missed calls, he rushed to the hospital, only to be met with heartbreaking news: they had lost the baby. The nursery had become a painful reminder, and Sarah couldn't stand staying in the house any longer. John understood completely. They decided to start fresh in the quieter Portland suburbs, away from the city's noise. But after a month of searching, they still hadn't found the right home. Their realtor, Jenny, suggested they either expand their search or connect with an old friend of hers, someone who knew the area and every house around. Trusting her advice, they visited Emmett at his luxurious, secluded mansion. Emmett welcomed them warmly, quickly noticing John's eye for architecture. The mansion, originally built in 1980, had taken Emmett nearly a decade to restore. Good houses were hard to find here, so they prepared for a long chat about their options. The couple was glad to stay for an early dinner with Emmett, who was curious why such a young pair wanted to move out of the city. Sarah explained they were looking to leave behind a painful chapter, and they toasted to a fresh start. Afterward, Emmett took them on a brief tour, pointing out various antiques, including old weapons that had been unearthed during the home's foundation work. To Emmett, these items were part of the house's rich, living history. Sarah loved the idea. She'd always dreamed of a home with real character. Then, to their surprise, Emmett offered to let them live in the mansion for free. It had once brought him joy, but now it was just a building to him, and he'd be glad if someone else found happiness there. Since John had had a few drinks, Emmett suggested they stay the night and pick up the conversation in the morning. Naturally, they agreed. Emmett's offer to let them live in his home for free was incredibly generous, almost too good to be true. But John and Sarah believed Emmett genuinely wanted to help. The next morning, they heard a car start and realized EMT had left, leaving them alone in the house. They found a note from him, saying he admired them as a couple and hoped they'd enjoy a happy life here, just as he once had with his family. He was ready to move on and wanted to pass the home, along with all its contents, to them, with one simple rule: never enter the cellar. If they agreed to the terms, the mansion would be theirs. To Sarah, it felt like a small price for such a luxurious new start, but John wasn't so sure it could be that simple. Emmett had even asked Jenny, their realtor, to prepare the contract, so it was all set to be official. Sarah, optimistic and hopeful, reminded John of all the savings they'd put into this move, while he struggled to understand why Emmett would just give them the place. With the house now theirs, practically a gift, they felt ready to dream of trying for a baby again. John finally agreed, and they signed the contract. Jenny wished them well, and the couple hugged, hardly able to believe they owned such a beautiful home they could never have afforded otherwise. It felt like the perfect place to start over, and John was starting to believe it too. After moving in, Sarah finally felt at peace enough to play the piano again. Before long, they decided to throw a housewarming party, marking a new beginning in their lives. The guests couldn't stop admiring the house. John's ex, Alyssa, had also shown up, invited by their colleague Zach. She sweetly handed Sarah a jasmine flower, but her presence still made John anxious. Alyssa seemed intent on checking in on him, ready to offer help, though he was clearly over their past. Just then, John's boss called him outside, where a strange man was waiting.
John approached the man, asking if everything was okay. The man simply replied that John should burn the house down while he still could, that the cost would be too great otherwise. Then he walked away, leaving John and Sarah unsettled, but they tried to brush it off.
Sarah met their neighbor, Catherine Conrad, and they shared a friendly chat. Catherine wished her well with settling in. That same day, John got called in by his boss. Alyssa had accused him of inappropriate conduct, leading to his suspension during the investigation. Unsure how to break the news to Sarah, he came home to find her saying she wanted to return to work. With the weight of his own troubles still unshared, John stepped outside to clear his head, his eyes landing on the cellar door. The memory of that party lingered, where guests had speculated about the contents, and Alyssa had confidently said that John wouldn't be able to resist looking. The next morning, after Sarah left for work, John went out for his usual run. It had been 2 weeks, and he still hadn't told her the truth, worried it would ruin the idealized image she held of him. He'd hoped to talk things out with Alyssa peacefully, but his boss had made it clear that even he wasn't allowed to speak to John until the investigation was over. John almost sent a message to Alyssa but stopped himself at the last second. His eyes drifted back to the cellar door. Feeling like he had nothing left to lose, he tried picking the lock but eventually gave up. Later at dinner, Sarah talked about setting up a nursery, but John seemed distracted. She noticed, and he finally admitted he was curious about what was in the basement. Sarah reminded John that breaking the contract could cost them their dream home, so they needed to stick to the rules. The next day, during her lecture, she explained the butterfly effect to her students, how small actions can trigger huge, irreversible events. Meanwhile, John left Alyssa a voicemail, asking her to call him back.
While inside, John noticed a hidden door and decided to contact the city archives for the house's blueprints. An archive worker mentioned that the previous owner had been Paul McManus, which unsettled John. The worker also shared a rumor that, about 25 years ago, Emmett's wife had fled in the night with their 5-year-old daughter, and neither had been seen since.
After checking the blueprints, John confirmed the door led to the cellar. He opened it but found the floor sealed with boards. While Sarah was busy teaching chaos theory, John grabbed his tools, pried up the boards, and headed down with a flashlight, only to find yet another obstacle waiting for him.
When Sarah got home and checked the mailbox, she didn't suspect a thing. John had just drilled a small hole and, hearing her come in, quickly went back upstairs, acting as if everything was normal. She'd noticed he'd been getting home from work earlier than usual lately.
Late one night, Alyssa called, and John agreed to meet her the next day at 2 p.m. in the office's underground parking lot. During their tense exchange, John confronted Alyssa about the rumors she'd spread, only for her to accuse him of being a liar. She revealed her anger over his empty promises to build a life together, unaware that John, despite his mistakes, had no intention of leaving his wife, whom he truly loved. Alyssa threatened to spill everything to Sarah. John's anxiety was always there, especially while Sarah worked on renovations. She noticed he'd started running more often, probably to clear his mind. One day, Sarah suddenly felt nauseous and took a pregnancy test, which turned out positive. But her happiness quickly faded when she found house blueprints hidden under the bed. That's when she realized John had been down in the basement, despite the owner's warning. Around that time, Alyssa showed up at their house, intending to reveal something to Sarah. She went down to the basement but quickly returned upstairs when her flashlight died. Not seeing Sarah, she wandered through the house, spotting photos of a happy Sarah and John on the wall. Then Alyssa noticed the positive pregnancy test in the nursery, struggling to keep her emotions in check. Hearing noises, Sarah rushed to the front door and noticed it was ajar. She'd just found out that John had met with Alyssa, which his boss admitted was a bad call. For now, he thought John should lay low. Later, John spotted Alyssa's car near their house and trailed her, coming home late. Sarah seemed lost in thought when John told her how thrilled he was about her pregnancy. But she had something else on her mind. She mentioned the basement. John assured her he hadn't gone down there, though he admitted he'd tried and promised he wouldn't again.
Sarah just wants to be certain she can fully trust her husband. Together, they sealed off the basement. Maybe some things are better left alone. She took the nursery planning seriously, already deciding on spots for the crib and changing table, though John thought she was getting a bit ahead of herself. Later, John got a call from HR, letting him know he'd been cleared in an investigation, bringing him a huge sense of relief. Sarah overheard but didn't catch what it was about.
John brushed it off, saying it was just some work issues that were now settled. His boss welcomed him back, and everyone in the office knew Alyssa's feelings for him, so no one bought her teary story, especially since she hadn't been to work in a week. While in the nursery, John noticed a bullet lodged in the wall. He considered calling the police, but his wife discouraged him, thinking there must be a simple explanation. John then mentioned that EMT's wife and daughter had gone missing 25 years ago. Sarah held her ground, thinking her husband was jumping to conclusions, but ever since, she couldn't get the cellar out of her mind.
When John saw detectives in the office, he asked HR what was going on.
They told him Alyssa's car had been found abandoned. Meanwhile, Sarah met up with Catherine Conrad at a bar to ask about their house's history. Catherine shared that the house had changed hands many times, with the last owners, the McManuses, mysteriously disappearing without a word.
She also casually mentioned seeing John during her morning runs, a surprise to Sarah, since he was supposed to be at work then.
The news was running a story on Alyssa Hayes' disappearance when Catherine left briefly to greet her yoga instructor. Later, during dinner, Sarah brought it up, mentioning she'd read about the search online. John said the police had visited his office, but no one seemed to know much. While he was in the shower, Sarah checked his laptop and found an HR email detailing Alyssa's accusations against him, along with a recent call to her on his phone. John couldn't stop thinking about the old bullet he'd found in the wall, likely fired from one of Emmett's antique guns. Sarah dismissed his worries. She didn't believe Emmett had hurt anyone and didn't want to risk losing the house. Just then, Detective Stark arrived to question John. While Sarah listened in from around the corner, John told them about his past with Alyssa, admitting he'd seen her the day before she disappeared. Sarah confirmed he'd been home the day she went missing, and the detectives left with no more questions. John tried to explain to Sarah that he hadn't mentioned the accusations because they were completely false. But Sarah, who'd had her suspicions for a while, was convinced he had cheated. When questioned by the police about Alyssa's disappearance, Sarah lied, not for John, but for the future of their child. Since moving in, everything's been going wrong, and John's convinced there's something dark about the house. After some digging, he tracked down Paul McManus, the previous owner, who he'd briefly met at the housewarming party. Paul, now grappling with his divorce, was hesitant to reveal what he knew about the Cellar's hidden secret. At first, the house had seemed like a dream come true for him too, an amazing deal. But he soon realized he'd made a devil's bargain. The house left him feeling like he was living a lie. He admitted he'd wanted to burn it down, convinced it was tied to something much darker than just the cellar or Emmett. While Sarah patched up the bullet hole in the wall, Paul admitted he regretted never opening the cellar door. He felt the only way to end this endless cycle was to break the contract and open it. John agreed and moved to do just that, but Sarah wasn't on board. As she painted the nursery, clinging to the hope of a brighter future in the house, John yelled that they were just hiding from the truth. Ignoring her protests, he started breaking the lock. Sarah tried to stop him, but when that failed, she knocked him out cold. John woke up on the couch in their living room, startled. Sarah, standing nearby, told him that sometimes opening a door means facing what's behind it. She then showed him Alyssa's phone. On that fateful day, Sarah had found Alyssa in their nursery, and, overwhelmed by rage when Alyssa claimed everything there should have been hers, Sarah shot her. She convinced herself it was necessary to protect their life together, reasoning it was the only logical outcome. Sarah had hidden Alyssa's body in the cellar and driven her car away, which made John realize it had been Sarah behind the wheel that day. After throwing John off her trail and disposing of Alyssa's phone, Sarah thought she had everything covered, except for a bullet left in the wall. Predictably, John wanted to go to the police, but Sarah, gun in hand, threatened to frame him if he did. To the cops, he'd be the obvious suspect. All she asked was his silence. After all, in her mind, Alyssa was a small price to pay for the life they could have together. Now, John had to decide, stay quiet and keep their life intact, or risk it all. During a party celebrating the baby on the way, John found it hard to keep up appearances. Among the gifts, they noticed one from Emmett, a cellar key and a note thanking them for bringing new energy to the old house. Emmett hinted that they might already have an idea of what lies down there, but left it up to them whether to find out. Personally, I think the cellar was empty, and the owner, who's super wealthy, was just messing with them. It seems like a test, since we all know how human nature works. If we're told not to do something, we want to do it even more. Maybe it was all about seeing if the couple could make it through, and they didn't until the end. But once they did, he gave them the mansion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for sticking around till the end, you're the best.